All right, I want to welcome everybody back to HRE Insights in 30, the podcast where we break down the real world risks, trends, and challenges shaping compliance and financial crime prevention. This is especially important for fintechs and, high risk financial businesses. I'm your host, Justin Muscolino, CEO of High Risk Education, where we do train fintechs, banks, and other high risk teams on everything from AML, fraud, sanctions, crypto oversight, and emerging technologies. Today, I am joined by someone who probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but he brings deep hands on experience in fraud prevention, payments risk, and fintech compliance. And that would be the one and only Brian Davis. Now,
Awesome. I think you're hyping me up a lot, but I appreciate having on me on today and always love talking about fraud to whoever will really listen. So I got your ears today and I appreciate you having me on. I'm really excited for this one. I think it's always a good time of the year as we record today. It is the middle of December. So we're right during the times when a lot of fraud risk compliance teams feeling a little tired and maybe watching some others disconnect a little bit more so than our industry. So I'm excited for today.
yeah, it's a good time of the year. I love the holidays, and it's a great time to have you on board. So, Brian, I'm going to kick it off with the first question, and I'm kind of curious about. You spent a lot of your career focused on fraud prevention and payments risk, inside fintechs, financial institutions. So, what pulled you into fraud, and what's really kept you in this space as the threats, keep on getting more intense?
Yeah, I'll start with the first part of that question. I found it earlier in my career. I found it in college, going through my master's. I was getting a master's in accounting. I placed out of a lot of my courses because I did my master's through the college that I attended in a 5-year program. And fraud, they offer these fraud courses. I got too deep into my accounting degree before I realized I don't know if this is for me. Uh, so I took my master's, even though I got a master's, MSA, master's of science in accounting. My courses were just entrepreneurship and fraud for the most part, and maybe a couple like general business courses. So that was really the first time I was able to be offered any classes on fraud and like in accounting, like there aren't many exciting courses that people talk about and say, yeah, I'll try to get in that one. So the fraud courses were really hard to get into. So fortunately, I was able to get into it later at the tail end of my program. And there was just something that piqued my interest with this. And maybe the case and how it's kind of structured, maybe still a little bit dry, but relative to the rest of the accounting course I was taking, I was like, there's something here. I like the investigation portions of it. It was all tailored around the Enron case. So depending on where and what generation you're a part of, you might not know Enron, and some of you are might be well before Enron or right in the middle. So my course was all around the Enron scandal and the investigations that went through that and how to actually investigate and some of the regulatory compliance issues there. So that was my first taste. However, I graduated and I got this piece of paper that said, I'm really, really, really good at budgeting. Good luck getting anything else. So I said, you know what? Let me try. And there also really weren't many fraud uh, jobs. So I got a graduate certificate in fraud and forensic accounting and a master's in accounting. And I said, I'll give accounting a chance. Maybe the real world's a little bit different. I will give it exactly a year. In exactly a year, not a day more, not a day less, I was out of accounting, and I was correct. Accounting just wasn't for me. I wanted to work at a startup. I didn't really even know what that meant. I wanted to work in a fraud role. I also didn't really know what that meant. So I felt like if I was able to find a fraud role, an entry level job, get myself in at a startup, I can figure it out. And let's see. I maybe had an early stage career crisis of I got this master's in accounting and I don't want to do accounting. I hope this fraud thing works out. I don't even know why I'm interested in it. I started out a marketplace there. So my weird little quirk is I like to see how different business models are abused by fraud. So I've done digital subscriptions, physical good, marketplaces, fintech. I've been on the vendor side, and today I'm running conferences and events and retreats for fraud and identity leaders in compliance. So that's how I got into it. I was able to convince somebody that I knew how to decrease their fraud risk because they were kind of letting through all criminals and rejecting all the legitimate users. So a little bit of pattern recognition. I was able to help them out. And really from there, I kind of stayed in that weird little niche of building fraud programs from scratch. So each step along the way, I got better and better at understanding how to actually build a fraud program. Maybe the first time around, I was unclear of what I'm really even doing, what a fraud rule, what am I supposed to do? Do we want more returns? Do we want less returns? Do we want more chargebacks? Do we want less chargebacks? I had to figure all that out. But each step along the way, I would come in, understand where we were at as a company, the risk surface area, and help us prioritize what problems need to be solved, what controls in place that are working, and ultimately build out the team, the tools, the rules, everything of the sort like that that goes into building a functional, mature fraud program.
I always find it interesting how people got to the point they're at in their career. Because it's interesting. Like there's a topic, like I'll give you an example, financial crimes. Like it kind of felt like I was brought into that type of topic because it's interesting as hell. It keeps you active, live, and it changes all the time. So it's not like, the same routine every day. But I find it fascinating how you got to where you were. And you also mentioned something about how you were building fraud programs, um, and also at different stages of companies. Now, in regards to particularly fintechs, what do you think the biggest fraud mistakes they make as they grow?
There's some challenges here because there's some macro challenges depending on what type of environment you find yourself in. And for my own personal experience, I have found that leadership obviously is always like set the tone at the top. And there's a clear difference for my personal experiences of working with first time founders and serial entrepreneurs. Reason being is first time founders grow by any means. I Fraud's never going to hit us, or we'll worry about that when it happens. It can never really be that bad. And then serial founders are like that one time we got crushed by XYZ, and maybe they might over invest earlier on to make sure that they are building stronger foundations. Now, that's probably personal experience. Not everybody learns from their mistakes, but that ultimately creates the sandbox of what I'm able to work in, the boundaries and constraints. So, part of my own learnings is the earlier I was in my career, I didn't really know how to navigate, how to break out of silos, how to get leadership or people who are key decision makers to actually care about fraud. So, there's a lot of like internal politics and gymnastics of that has helped me, not necessarily to manipulate people, but to understand how does this company actually make decisions? What are the processes? How do we buy tools? How do we assess opportunities? How do we hire? And the more I was able to get and build allyship, the more I understood how decisions were being made, it allowed me to build relationships with key individuals within those processes. So if I don't even know how decisions are made, it's going to be harder for me to maybe get a new tool, maybe hire someone. Maybe I'm underpaid and I need to build a business case for myself to just have a livable salary based on the market. So there's lots of different personal, professional aspects of it that it's able to impact you by just understanding how decisions are made. And companies will mature differently. So an early stage startup, say, maybe very dynamic, and you might have a more direct line to the CEO or the head of product, and it's easier to get involved. A larger, more corporate company, and I won't say I've worked at any of the top 50s. That's not really where I enjoy spending my time. I like working at the earlier stage startups, and as they grow, I look to go back to an even earlier stage company. I know my niche. So I won't necessarily speak at like a top 50, but you have different boundaries and constraints and silos and optics and more people involved. So the general understanding of how do I build relationships with the right people still works in those situations. Working with others and supporting others in doing exercises like this, I know it works. It just
Mhm.
sometimes is harder depending on who you work with and what type of company you work in. You just have to understand the boundaries and constraints. So, all of that to answer your question is if I don't work through those exercises of understanding how decisions are made and working through mapping my risk surface area of understanding in my role, what should I really be protecting and what are we protecting well and what are we vulnerable to and what's changing very quickly. If I don't have those answers, it's going to be hard to carry on those conversations, which then puts me in a hole of working in silos, not necessarily having people understand what I do, being really hard to get budget or headcount. So the exercise works of walking through all those processes. Then if I don't do that, if I don't meet people, if I don't internally network and build relationships, it's harder for me to do my job well because when I don't want to wait for a fraud spike to happen, we get crushed. And then I have negative attention on me of being,
Mhm.
Brian, I thought we were doing good. Why is this happening now? Why am I just finding out about this now? That's not the type of pressure I want to operate in. I want to do my best to educate people ahead of the time there.
Yeah, I mean, regardless, you need to know the answers. You need to know the context. What are the objectives, regardless of the size of that particular firm? Yeah, I mean, I hear you. You can't do your job effectively unless you get your questions answered, to put together a solution that makes sense. So that, I love it. Love it, Brian. It kind of brings us to AI. We're not going to get out of this conversation without talking about AI a little bit. Um, and we know AI is increasingly driving fraud detection, transaction monitoring, what else? Customer risk scoring. So, like from your experience, where does AI genuinely help fraud teams, and where does it introduce, sometimes new risk?
So I think we're learning in live. There's a big aspect of it of what is realistic? What are we actually seeing? How do I determine if we're actually seeing this? So, an idea is agents onboarding or agentic commerce. How do I know that this isn't just a bot that I've been seeing? How do I know that this isn't Brian? How do I know this isn't a manipulated actor? Like, what
Hmm.
are the different data points and signals I have here? So that's really, we're all learning right now. No one really has the answers. We have to have some hard conversations of who's accountable for what. When does the liability shift? None of that's figured out at really any level. And I think that adds a little bit of skepticism because in the fraud industry, if you're wrong, there can be big consequences. So there's a changing. I do feel like there's a changing of the aptitude, though. Of there are a lot of people who are well beyond me in years in the space, kind of almost going through a career crisis of being the vendors that I've known through and through that I've brought along each step along the way. Are they really building for the future?
Hmm.
Is what they're doing really going to help me out? I'm seeing a shift in the market where people who might traditionally have never spoken to a seed company, a pre-seed company, and maybe even a series A, so some early stage companies are poking around saying, all right, well, what are you doing that's different? Because the infrastructure to them of some of these newer stage companies are built foundationally with or in support of AI infrastructure,
Hmm.
where your more legacy players are not. And this is where you'll start to see some teams and products maybe saying we are AI, we do have AI products, but it's just a basic summarization product that I can just skim and do that anyway. So we're at this time right now of people are skeptical but very curious of what's it impacting the threats that I'm seeing and what can I do in my day to day to make my team more indispensable, higher leverage, higher output per employee. Now, I don't think people are saying we're going to cut the entire team. But as the fraud team, we already know we work in boundaries and constraints of, well, can you do more with less? So AI actually gives us an opportunity if you work in an environment that allows you to test and see what I can and can't do to actually allow your team to do more. Better triage, better notes, allowing some agents to go out and do web scraping or research of based on different criteria, being able to do risk surface area assessments live to say, hey, where are we vulnerable for identity theft, payment fraud, mule accounts, and walking through the risk surface area to say, do we have the right controls in place? Yes or no? All the way to rule tuning. The example that I point out now, it's been a couple months, but there, I believe it was a Google AI agent found a live vulnerability that was being taken advantage of. That they stopped it, patched it, and put it into production and stopped the malicious actor without human intervention, and then sent like a postpartum so people knew postmortem so people knew what actually happened and the impact of it. So the way that I think about that in fraud is, hey, we're seeing card testing, we're seeing money movement, we're seeing different patterns that we just as humans can't find. Depending on the company you're at, you might have extreme volumes and you're unable to see some of these maybe low dollar transactions or some better kiting and circumvention around the like basic controls some companies put in place to actually say, we're spotting this anomalous behavior. We put a hold on it. We're going to change the rules in live time. We'll send an update and alert to the team. And then when the activity slows down, if we start to see on the other end false positives go up, we'll in real time loosen the rules to allow more legitimate behavior to go in. So a lot of that's activity that humans can do, but it can be sped up tremendously. And then there's ACH returns, depending on where you work, chargeback disputes. The scales and volumes sometimes are unachievable for a human to go through and say, well, how did this happen? What do I need to do? What do I need to research? How do I build a business case to protect the rules and be able to analyze large amounts of patterns of saying, how did this user end in this moment? What went wrong? And being able to very quickly answer those questions, not only on one-off basis, but 1,000-off basis, 100x,
Right.
1,000x at scale like that. So there's lots of opportunities. And really where I say is start small, honestly. Like you don't have to overhaul everything today, but there might be a wish list of I wish we could do this, or I can't do that, or I've never been able to do this. I think a lot of people start thinking of what can I replace myself with? Like I hate doing this. What can I do there? That's an okay place to start. So start small, something that's achievable, something that you can measure, something to get buy-in and support from your team, from the executives. And I'm seeing a lot more people kind of test out prototypes.
Hmm.
So it's a lot easier to send that to product and have something tangible. So the product and eng teams actually know what someone like me, non-technical, is really trying to communicate so we can build a better internal functionality, reporting, investigation tool, whatever it may be. I'm seeing people maybe not build, replace, and build tools themselves, but it's a lot more of a valuable conversation with product and eng instead of trying to explain what fraud is, of sending them a prototype and saying, this is what I built, this is what I want it to do. And then it's helping speed up some internal conversations like that as well.
No, that's a really good point. And one thing that you mentioned, and something I've been experiencing a lot lately, is that people are fearful of AI. They don't know it well enough. They don't know how to implement it. There's really just, they're trying to be more, I guess, reactive when the situation arises and then implement something. Are you seeing any fear with AI? I mean, to implement more solutions and take it to the next level?
Absolutely. And I think this also goes back to like there's mentality of if you bring in the expensive old player that everybody knows about, probably not going to get fired. They'll do an okay job.
Mm.
But if you bring in the hot, cool startup that could be way better, but might not last, you could get fired for that. A lot of people are scared for their reputation. And there's a lot of unknown here. And because of the unknown, and no one really has answers, most people don't want to be the guinea pig. So I don't know if you're familiar with crossing the chasm, but it's a little bit of a bell curve of there's early mover markets and there's a big gap until the rest of the market starts to slowly come along, and then down the line, more adoption, general adoption. We're before the chasm. So we really haven't crossed that. And there aren't many public use cases of people sharing, which, surprise, surprise, we work in fraud. Everybody's very close lipped, even puts us at a disadvantage because criminals are sharing way better than us. And when we don't share, we don't really know what other people are doing, which puts us in a very lagged state. And everyone says we want to be proactive, we don't want to be reactive. But when we don't share internally or with our peers, we put ourselves in a disadvantage. Now, I know there are some things you cannot share, and I'm not saying share everything, but there are different aspects that we can share way better. And this could be another area of where are you thinking of using AI? Here's where I've been playing. I've built this agent. I'm using this tool. Now, if you start to share a little bit better with simplicities like that, because in fraud, it's we're all facing criminals. That's the pressure we face. So we all have similar opponents, and we're not necessarily, from a fraud perspective, fighting over customers. We are trying to protect our customers from criminals. And by not sharing, we put ourselves behind them.
Very cool. And I got one final question. I want you to bust out your crystal ball. What do you see in 2026? We're, 2 weeks away, even less. Where are the areas you think people are going to focus more, or really the areas that need more focus going into the new year?
I don't think there's going to be much change in the new year. I think we're a little bit overhyped ahead on what we think for adoption with AI. Think where we're at. There's been a lot of movement in other industries in fraud. I'm seeing a lot of money being built, being poured in for new companies being built. They're going to start to gain some traction over the next year, but I still think we're 2, 3 years away until more companies are public about their adoption and more people are using it for more day-to-day operations. I think in the next year we'll have a lot more of the harder conversations and a little bit more sharing around where should I start, what should I do, but that doesn't necessarily mean adoption and expansion. I think in the next year, sorry, it's boring, but I think we're a little overhyped in the next 2, 3 years around what people will actually do and can do. We think a lot of like closed minded of let me just automate summarization, let me just build analytics to run through my data, like the things that I can kind of do okay today. People are looking to put in with AI. I think by the end of the year we'll start to have bigger ideas of what we can actually do and haven't really thought of. So honestly, 2026, I don't think too much. I think we'll have more conversations and research, but I do think we're undervaluing and underthinking what will be done in 5 years. I think we're not even close to what we can imagine in 5 plus years. I think we're overhyping the next 2 years and way underselling the 5 years plus.
Well, it's definitely going to be interesting to see. And, Brian, thank you so much for bringing, I got to say, a grounded fraud perspective to this conversation. Fraud is often the place fintechs feel and, the most. And your experience really does show how, critical strong fraud programs are at sustaining growth. So, a big thank you to you for joining us on HRE Insights. And, it's been a pleasure.
I appreciate you having me on. And these types of conversations, these are the hard conversations that I'm having daily with practitioners. So my main role at Safeguard is we are an events company putting for AI curious fraud, identity, compliance senior leaders. We have a pretty incredible lineup of people who will be joining us at the Broadmoor in May for a leaders retreat. So if this is something of interest and you these types of conversations, the hard ones we have to have, if you want to be part of the right people in the right room at a 5-star resort and treat the fraud on identity, compliance leaders to an experience that we all deserve, especially after this holiday season. Check out safeguardevent.com, learn a little bit more. And for qualified practitioners, we want to make it as easy as possible for you to be out there. So, complimentary ticket, a $750 travel reimbursement. So, we'd love to see you in the mountains.
All right, thank you, Brian. And for all the listeners, we will post information regarding the event Brian just mentioned. So see if you can go. It's going to be well worth it. All right, Brian, thank you again. I really
Justin, I
appreciate it.
appreciate you.
All right, man. Till next time.